Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dollar Dialogue. Today, we're here to discuss another very interesting topic with another very interesting guest speaker. Our topic of discussion for today is episode 24, Green Giants: How Scandinavian Economies Are Leading the World in Sustainable Innovation, with Amer Bhuiyan. Mr. Amer Bhuiyan is currently taking a gap year. He was a senior at the American International School, Dhaka, AISD, and we're very glad to have him here today. He's very interested in political economic affairs. He has taken global politics. He had taken global politics as one of his HLs, and he was an active participant of Model United Nations. In fact, he traveled with us to Taiwan to participate in the Model United Nation conference. And Amer Bhuiyan is also very interested in economic affairs pertaining to the European continent, and so we are very glad to have him with us here today. Mr. Amer Bhuiyan, would you like to add anything to the introduction that I've just said?
No.
Okay, let's get into a topic of discussion for today, which is episode 24, Green Giants: How Scandinavian economies are leading the world in sustainable action. So let's talk about a little about the Scandinavian countries together before we talk about the Green Giants. Scandinavian countries are countries which are Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and they're one of the, you can say, most prosperous countries in the world because they have a very high GDP per capita. They have a very high human development index. So in that aspect, they're very successful. So let's get into one of the first Scandinavian country, which is Norway. So Norway has a GDP of $540 billion nominal. It has a GDP per capita of around $100,000, which is among the highest in the world. And its main industries include oil and gas. And it's actually the largest sector, contributing for around 20% of GDP and 50% of total exports. And there's also strong focus on hydroelectric power, which supplies 95% of electricity needs, and shipping, fisheries, and aquaculture are also significant industries in the country. And Norway has an unemployment rate of 3.6%, which is one of the lowest in Europe. And it has the world's largest sovereign wealth fund at around which is valued at around $1.4 trillion, which provides a cushion for economic stability. It also has a parliamentary constitutional monarchy, and it has strong welfare policies providing universal healthcare, education, and social benefits. And it has also a political focus on transition to a greener economy, as Norway is heavily dependent on oil and gas, and emphasizing renewable energy and electric vehicles, EVs. Norway also leads globally in EV adoption. And there's also a very unique culture aspect of Norway. Norway focuses on shorter work hours and generous parental leave policies. And there's also strong social trust in Norway's government, which has led to stable economic performances and effective implementation of government policies. And there's also a strong focus on resource conservation and sustainable management of natural health. And for our next Scandinavian country, which is Sweden, Sweden has a GDP of around $630 billion. It has a GDP per capita of around 60,000 US dollars. And it is also home to technology and manufacturing. Big technology manufacturing companies. For example, it is home to major global companies such as Volvo, Ericsson, and IKEA. It is also heavily invested in renewable energy with heavy investments in wind and hydropower. And the services sector is also the largest employer in Sweden, which contributes to around 70% of GDP. The unemployment rate of Sweden is it's a little bit high right now. I think it's around 7.4%, which is slightly above the EU average rate due to immigration and labor market adjustments. And there is also strong exports of machinery, motor vehicles, telecommunication equipment, and pharmaceuticals, which are major exports of Sweden. And as for the political structure of the Swedish government, it is a parliamentary constitutional monarchy. It has a stable political environment with coalition governments common due to a multi-party system. And it is also a comprehensive welfare state with a focus on healthcare, education, child benefits. And Sweden also has progressive climate policy, including ambitions towards carbon neutrality by 2045, with incentives for renewable energy and green technology. And there's also an innovation culture aspect of Sweden. There's also high investments in research and development, R&D, creating a startup friendly environment. And there's also a lot of gender equity in the Swedish economy and Swedish nation. There's strong cultural emphasis on gender equality in the workplace and political representation, and there are also some cultural tensions which exist around integrating immigrants with political debates focusing on welfare and national identity. And our next economy and next Scandinavian country is Denmark. Denmark has a GDP of $450 billion. It has a GDP per capita of around $77,000. And it is also home to major pharmaceuticals and medical technology, including Novo Nordics. It's also highly agriculturally efficient, and it's known for its pork and dairy exports. And it's also a leader in wind energy technology and aims to have 100% renewable energy by 2030. It also has an unemployment rate of around 4.2%, indicating a strong labor market. And the exports of the nation are pharmaceuticals, machinery, food products, and renewable technology. As for the government structure, it is a parliamentary constitutional monarchy, and there's also the Danish economy also follows the flexicurity model, which combines flexible labor markets with comprehensive social security and provides a safety net for workers while allowing companies to adjust a workforce efficiently. And the Danish economy and the Danish government also have ambitious climate targets, aiming for a 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. As for the cultural factors, they have a cultural concept called hiji, which emphasizes on comfort, work-life balance, and well-being, and contributes to high level of happiness and productivity. And there's also a lot of high level of trust in government and public institutions, aiding policy implementation and economic efficiency. And there are also strong collaboration between government, business, and labor unions to ensure stable economic growth. So these are the basic information behind the Scandinavian countries. Are there anything that you would like to add to the introduction, or any new information that you would like to add to the things that I've just said, Mr. Amer Bhuiyan, Arif Malik, or Shazib Karim?
Yeah, Araf. Scandinavia's approach to economic growth, in my opinion, is very unique because personally, like me and you visited, I believe, Sweden once in like 2019, I believe, and even there, I saw like there was a huge movement regarding climate change, regarding the sustainable part of the economy. And I would say like Sweden is the biggest country in the Scandinavian region in terms of population. And I saw like a lot of carbon pricing going on, and particularly in Sweden has set an ambitious goal to become carbon neutral by 2045, and its journey towards this objective offers powerful insights regarding how to align environmental goals with economic growth. And I would say the key to Sweden's strategy is carbon pricing, which was introduced through a carbon tax in 1991, and this is one of the highest in the world, currently around $137 per ton of carbon dioxide. And taxation encourages industries to and consumers to shift towards low carbon alternatives. I think California also employed a similar tactic regarding carbon taxes, and this is actually a really good strategy because it mitigates the negative externalities, and it tries to shift the market towards the correct equilibrium point. And other than that, I would say other than Sweden, I would also like to talk about Norway, because Norway has seen electrifying its economy, particularly in the EV electronic vehicle sector. And thanks to like government incentives in Norway, like 0% VAT on EV purchases, free public parking, and access to bus lanes, over 80% of the new cars sold in Norway are electric as of 2023. So I would say Norway's tax policy ensures that owning a EV is economically advantageous compared to gasoline-powered cars, which incentivizes consumers to shift towards greener choices. And particularly for Denmark, I would say Denmark is a pioneer in its wind energy, because Denmark was one of the first countries to invest heavily in wind power, and today it derives more than 40% of its electricity from wind energy, with ambitious plans to expand this capacity further. Particularly, there's a company that I was looking called the Ørsted company, which transitioned from fossil fuels to renewable energy and is now a global leader in offshore wind energy, with farms not only in Denmark but also in some countries in the UK, with but in also in other countries like the UK and the US. So I would say, I would say this wind energy sector has also created a lot of jobs for Danish citizens, particularly like about over 30,000 jobs, and like this has been successful. So I would say the main strategy that the Scandinavian countries are employing is that they are encouraging more sustainable way of living through tax incentives, and by through tax incentives for the producers, and also for the consumers. So yeah, I saw Amer's hand raised as well.
Yeah. So when you were talking about Norway, I think Norway, from all the three green giants, has the most potential for like becoming like a economic, like becoming like an environmentally and economically sustainable, green giant. Because from as Araf mentioned, Norway's GDP per capita is very high. In fact, I think it's like top 3 or top 5 in the entire world, and that's, I think it's because of the oil industry. It has one of the largest oil industries. So I think with that much economic stability, I think they are able to like grow their sustainable able to be more sustainable in the future. So all their plans, I think, even though they are focusing a lot on hydroelectric power, which has been really effective, they should also switch to also use other renewable resources, other renewable and sustainable methods like solar power, because solar power is one of the most effective power sources. And but the only problem is that it's really costly. But for Norway, that's not a problem, because they are economically really sustainable, and if they try to aim for a solar power, then in the future, in the next few decades, they could become the first full solar power country. Yeah. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, Amer, I'd say I would 100% agree with your insights on Norway, but now to add my insights, and I'd like to shift the focus on Denmark. And I know, Araf, you had also touched on it a bit. So in my opinion, I'd say that Denmark's success can largely be attributed to its aggressive push for renewable energy, especially wind power. And Denmark has been a pioneer in wind energy since the 1970s. And today, wind power accounts for more than 50% of the country's total electricity consumption. And I think that just speaks volumes, because, you've probably heard of the famous Danish company Vestas, as, it's one of the world's largest manufacturers of wind turbines. And also, Denmark's commitment to sustainability also extends beyond energy, because if we look at Copenhagen, it's one of the most sustainable cities in the world, and the city has an ambitious goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2025. And Copenhagen is known for its extensive bike lanes, and over 60% of its residents commute to work by bike, and this reduces traffic congestion and cuts down on carbon emissions from cars. And this has been benefiting them significantly. And it's not just about cycling. Copenhagen is also investing heavily in green building practices, efficient waste management, and public transportation. And the city's district heating system, which runs on waste to energy plants and renewable energy, provides heat to nearly 98% of Copenhagen's households. And this kind of large scale urban planning is what's setting Denmark apart when it comes to creating truly sustainable cities.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your invaluable opinions and thoughts on this matter. And let's right now do a comparative analysis of the three Scandinavian economies: Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. So, as for the economic strengths, if you look at it, Norway is driven mostly by oil and gas, but has a strong emphasis on diversification and wealth management. And Sweden is an industrial and tech powerhouse, and which focuses on innovation and export-oriented growth. And Denmark leads in renewable energy and agriculture efficiency with a diverse economy. As for the political characteristics and comparison between the three countries, all three countries are constitutional monarchies with stable political environments, and they have high levels of social welfare. Spending are defining features supported by progressive taxation, And Norway has a unique advantage of its sovereign wealth fund to safeguard its economy. And there's also cultural aspects of the three nations. There's strong social cohesion and trust in institutions, which are present in all three countries, which contributes to economic stability. There's also work-life balance and well-being, which are culturally significant, leading to a high quality of life. And there's also focus on sustainability and renewable energy, and which is embedded on both cultural attitudes and policy making. And as for key statistical summary, if you look at it, Norway has a GDP per capita of 990 and $99,000. Sweden has a GDP per capita of $60,000, while Denmark has a GDP per capita of $77,000. As for the unemployment rates, as of 2023, Norway has an unemployment rate of around 3.6%. Sweden has one about 7.4%, and Denmark has one about 4.2%. And also, there are also key economic sectors in these three nations. For example, Norway has a strong oil and gas, renewable energy, and shipping sector, while Sweden has manufacturing tech services, while Denmark has pharmaceuticals, agriculture, and renewable energy. And there are also key challenges and future outlooks for these nations. For example, Norway has to manage the green transition away from oil dependence while maintaining economic stability through investments in renewable and other sectors, while Sweden has to integrate a diverse immigrant population into the labor force while maintaining economic growth by innovation exports. And Denmark has to expand renewable energy leadership and address demographic challenges, which includes aging population that could pressure the welfare system. So this is a very brief analysis and comparative analysis between the three nations. Are there anything that you would like to add to the things that I've just said? Shazib Karim, Amer, Bhuiyan, or Arif Malik?
Yeah, sure, Arav. So I think when we're doing the comparative analysis between these three big countries, we can first start by looking at the energy. And as you also mentioned before, Denmark is often referred to as the global leader in wind energy, as they were the early adapters of wind technology and now generate more than 50% of the electricity from wind power. And offshore and wind farms are a massive part of the strategy. And companies like Vestas and Ørsted are leading the charge in renewable energy innovation. Meanwhile, Sweden has taken a more diverse approach to renewable energy, as while wind power plays a role, Sweden's main renewable energy resource is hydropower, which accounts for nearly half of its energy mix. And Sweden also aims to be completely fossil fuel free by 2045. And hydropower combined with their growing wind and solar sectors is pushing them towards that goal. And then, there's Norway, which presents, an interesting paradox. Despite being one of the largest oil exporters in the world, Norway is also world leader in renewable energy, with 98% of its domestic electricity generation coming coming from hydropower. And the revenue from all exports is largely reinvested into their 1.4 trillion sovereign wealth fund, the world's largest, used to finance green investments both at home and abroad. And Norway's goal is to balance its oil economy with sustainability by becoming carbon neutral by 2050. And I'd say what's fascinating here is how these countries have chosen different primary sources of energy, but they've all found ways to grow their economies while reducing domestic reliance on fossil fuels. And as you can see, Denmark leads in wind, Sweden in hydropower, and Norway is mastering a balance between all exports and domestic green energy.
Yeah, to add on to Shazib's points, I think all of their biggest strength, even though Norway, Sweden, and Denmark all take different approaches, including their main energy source, etc. They all have one thing in common that's actually, I believe, is their biggest strength, and that is their urban planning for sustainability. So all of them have so Norway, for example, they have they have electric vehicles, like you just said, and Sweden has they also have electric vehicles, public transports. And they have extensive urban planning, so everything they make sure that all the things that happens in all the passive carbon emissions and greenhouse gases emissions, that they try to keep it to the lowest. Denmark, like Shazib said earlier, has bicycle friendly cities, so like Copenhagen. Um, so these all like their attempts at like keeping like the daily passive greenhouse emissions low is, I think, their biggest strength. It helps them keep sustainable. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Amer and like Shazib and Araf, whatever like the stuff you guys were saying, and particularly to add on to Amer's point regarding urban planning. I would say like all not only these three Scandinavian countries, but when we're also talking about, we should also consider Finland, which is not often discussed. These all of these countries have urban planning which has led to environmental sustainability, and has also led to all these four countries to have stable democracies, and also to have one of the wealthiest economies in the world. For example, one of the wealthiest economies in the world. But however, despite all of these, I would say that the one potential challenges that all these Scandinavian countries might face is particularly in the political landscape, because like let's look at Sweden, for example, because Sweden's political system has traditionally focused on social democracy and consensus building, but growing populism and polarization are challenging this status quo. And also, as immigration rises, so do the tensions about how to allocate the public resources, which could affect the consensus around progressive taxation and generous welfare policies. And additionally, the climate action policies sometimes face resistance from conservative constituencies who fear that ambitious environmental goals will hurt industries like manufacturing and agriculture, for example. And in Norway as well, there's a high degree of political stability, but there's still some tensions regarding people in the rural communities who don't want so many taxation policies regarding so many taxation policies regarding the climate change, and so therefore there is some potential challenges there. But other than that, I would say the economy also is economy of all of Sweden, Denmark, and Finland are relatively set for the long term. But however, I would say one exception would be Norway, because Norway is heavily reliant on its oil and gas sector, and although it is investing in renewable energy, the transition to post-oil economy, in my opinion, could compromise some of the high standard of living in Norway. And I would say Norway's sovereign wealth fund provides a buffer, but its prosperity hinges on how it can effectively diversify its economy. I think the UAE, particularly the Emirate of Dubai, is doing a good job regarding how they are diversifying their economy despite being reliant on natural resources.
Shazib, I see your hand raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure. And but first of all, I'd like to like thank you guys for your own insights. And so I think another factor we can look at is maybe is the carbon taxes and economic growth, because we can look at one of the defining policies for these countries, which is carbon taxes. And while all three countries use carbon taxes to curb emissions, they differ in how they've implemented and scaled these taxes. Like, for example, Sweden was one of the first countries to implement a carbon tax in 1991, and it currently has one of the highest carbon tax rates in the world. And this has had like a dramatic effect on reducing emissions, and Sweden's economy has continued to grow alongside it as well. And the revenue from this tax has been used to invest in green infrastructure and technology, ensuring that businesses are incentivized to adopt cleaner practices. And also, Denmark, like Sweden, has also introduced a carbon tax early on. And what's unique about Denmark's system is how closely it's tied to the renewable energy goals, especially wind energy. And the carbon tax revenue has been a key factor in financing Denmark's transition to renewable energy, as it has allowed the country to build its massive wind farms and lead in clean energy technology as well. And So while talking about Norway now, and Norway also has a carbon tax, but due to its oil industry, it's a bit more complex. And Norway taxes carbon emissions from oil production, which incentivizes the industry to innovate cleaner extraction methods. And also at the same time, the revenue from the oil sector has been invested in the sovereign wealth fund, which is being used to fund green projects and renewable initiatives both domestically and globally. So I'd say, in my opinion, what stands out is that all three countries show that carbon taxes can coexist with strong economic growth. And these taxes have not stifled innovation, but have instead propelled green advancements and furthered their sustainable goals.
Yeah, I like what you said. I think looking at the GLR, the Green Living Rankings, most of the countries in the list are European countries. I think that pattern exists because Europe is because of the political and economic stability in Europe, which is largely due to the EU maintenance. Because if you look at the list, there's the green giants, and then there's Finland, like Arif said, Switzerland, um, Germany, New Zealand, etc. And but I think outside Europe, there's also some other countries. Like in Asia, there's Japan. Um, and yeah, so Japan's the reason Japan is very green in terms of energy is because of it's basically made out of few islands, and so it's covered in like mostly natural resources. So it allows. So I think having like a having reserved renewable resources actually helps a country, like kicks it off to a sustainable development, like Sweden, which is full of renewable resources. Um, so yeah, like countries with reserve resources, they get a head start. But even like countries like I think like Denmark and Norway, which which does not have as much reserved renewable resources as Norway did, and other like and Japan, they still like they're still like a green giant. And I think and that is because of their like Shazib said, carbon taxing um, and other greenhouse emission taxing, which actually decreases their emissions by a lot and keeps the country environmentally sustainable. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Amer and Shazib the regarding the fact that there's a pattern there's a pattern in the list, and as to why Scandinavia ranks consistently high. And I would also like to talk about some of the intersection of the environmental policy and the economic growth. So Shazib was talking about the carbon taxes. So the carbon taxes are special kind of taxes which are designed to internalize the negative externalities of carbon emissions by incorporating the social cost of carbon into the prices of goods and services. And this type of special taxes is aimed to create an incentive structure where the businesses and consumers shift toward a cleaner energy while still promoting the economic growth. And at the heart of the carbon taxes in Scandinavia, I would say is a concept called the Pigouvian taxes. So Pigouvian taxes are designed to correct the market failures by taxing the activities that generate the negative externalities. And I would say the Pigouvian tax is a form of a carbon tax that Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland are quintessentially employing, and this has resulted in a lot of positive benefits for this country because Sweden's carbon tax has led to a lot of allocative efficiency. Everyone and not everyone, but I would say majority of the Swedish citizen and majority of the Scandinavian citizens live a quality of life which is higher than United States, for instance, because all these countries they employ there's an intersection of government intervention, and also the market to respond freely. I would say these countries have found a right balance, because as a result of because government intervention, most people assume is kind of bad, but it's not necessarily bad. Like in the US, for example, it employs capitalism, where there's less government intervention. But less government intervention often means that when the market isn't going in the correct direction, there's no one to fix it. But I would say the Scandinavian countries understood that sometimes market intervention is needed, and the government is actually very smart. The government is really good at urban planning. The government is really good at employing taxes to make sure the citizens go in the right direction regarding the climate change and regarding being efficient, being energy efficient. So I would say these Scandinavian countries, I would say that at the heart of their success is probably the government planning, and how clean the government is, because their government isn't necessarily corrupt, and the government usually, like most of the time, work towards the greater collective good, which I think is lacking in most parts of the world.
Thank you everyone for all the opinions that you have shared. Again, our topic of discussion is episode 24, Green Giants, how Scandinavian economies are leading the world in sustainable innovation. In order to talk about the green transition that some of you have highlighted, for example, the Norway green energy transition, hydroelectric power, actually for Norway, hydroelectric power supplies over 95% of the country's electricity needs, making Norway one of the greenest energy producers globally. And they also have invest a lot in offshore wind projects, including floating offshore wind projects with a plan to produce 30 gigawatts by 2040. And they also have a carbon capture and storage CCS project, as some of you may have mentioned, which is a leader in CCS technology with facilities such as the Sleipner CCS projects, storing over 1 million tons of CO2 per year. They also have electrical vehicle leadership. In 2023, 79% of all new cars sold in Norway were fully electric, demonstrating a significant shift towards greener mobility. The government also provides incentives like tax exemptions, toll waivers, and free parking to accelerate the EV transition. And there's also a lot of sustainable fisheries. The Norwegian fishing industry follows strict sustainability quotas, and over 90% of Norway's fish stocks are certified by the Marine Stewardship Council (MSC). And there's also strong investments in aquaculture innovation, including focusing on reduced environmental impact and improving feed efficiency through technologies like recirculating agriculture system (RAS). And Norway's sovereign wealth fund, which has been mentioned over and over again, is valued over $1.4 trillion and is committed to ethical investments, avoiding companies involved in heavy pollution or unsustainable practices. And their policies also support public-private partnerships to foster green technologies in shipping, renewable energy, and sustainable agriculture. As for the renewable energy production, Norway plans to as for the renewable energy production for Sweden, move on to Sweden. Sweden plans to quadruple its energy capacity by 2040, with onshore and offshore projects adding around 120 TWh to the grid, and around 30% of the energy production in Sweden is done by nuclear power, which complements renewables to maintain a stable energy supply. And the Swedish government also follows a strong circular economy, with 99% of household waste being recycled or used to produce energy. And companies like IKEA are also leading in circular business models, pledging to be fully circular by 2030 through initiatives like furniture leasing and using only renewable and recycled materials. And Sweden also has a project called Hybrid Project, which is done through collaboration between SSAB, LKAB, and Vattenfall, and is working on replacing cooking coal and steel production with hydrogen, aiming to produce fossil-free steel. And the first commercial product is expected to be released by 2026. And companies like Nordvolt in Sweden also produces sustainable lithium-ion batteries with a focus on green energy and recycling, which supports the electrification of vehicles and storage solutions. And Sweden also issued green bonds worth billions of dollars to finance green infrastructure projects supporting a green transition. And the policies also aim to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies by 2030 and incentivize renewable energy through tax breaks. So this is a very brief summary between the energy initiatives that have been taken by the green giants and to lead the world in sustainable innovation, and which were done by Norway and Sweden. Are there anything that you'd like to add to the things that I've just said before we move on to Denmark's discussion? Mr. Amer, Bhuiyan, Arif Malik, or Shazib Karim?
This is a little thing that I thought about, like when you were talking about the initiatives. Um, in Italy, I heard that they have this thing called a DRS, which is the bottle, like where you can deposit like plastic, like one time use plastic bottles, plastic wrappers, and everything, and they get paid, and people get paid for it. So I think that like tackles not only sustainable and not only like keeping the environment clean, but also helping like people, like homeless people, like earn just slight, like just a bit of money every day. And I think like this type of like small initiatives can add up, like as time goes on, like maybe like now it's not much, but in 10 years it is going to become like 200% more clean, for example, like in terms of environment. And yes, so I want that.
Arif, I see your hand just raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, Raf. So you were talking about Denmark, and I have a friend called Yasin Buyukarsan Heita, and he used to go to AISD as well, and he was partly I think he was half Danish, and he would often talk to me about Denmark and regarding its green policies that the government is doing. So, firstly, I would like to say, like, even Denmark, like Sweden, introduced a carbon tax in the early 90s, and it applies to fossil fuels and everything. And I would say this tax is a form of Pigouvian tax, which tries to internalize the negative externalities of carbon emissions. And currently, the tax is currently around Danish crown 170 or $25 per ton of carbon dioxide for businesses. So I would say, unlike other countries, Denmark has a multi-layered carbon pricing system, which includes carbon taxes on emissions directly tied to burning fossil fuels, and there's also energy taxes, which are broader and apply to the consumption of electricity and heating, which incentivizes households to and businesses to use energy more efficiently. And also there's the European Union emissions trading system, ETS, which Denmark participates in the European Union's carbon trading system, and it applies to large emitters such as power plants and factories. I would say this system on taxation policies regarding the environment sets a cap on total emissions and allows companies to trade emission allowances, and creating a market-driven approach to reducing emissions. So I would say one of the key economic theories in play regarding Denmark's carbon tax is a classic example of the Pigouvian taxes, and also according to the Porter hypothesis. According to Porter hypothesis, well-designed environmental regulations can stimulate innovation and enhance competitiveness. And I would say Denmark's carbon tax and its green policies support this hypothesis. And Denmark's stringent environmental regulations have actually encouraged innovation rather than discouraged in the renewable energy technologies, particularly in the wind energy sector, where there's famous companies like Ørsted or Vestas, which are global leaders in the production and deployment of wind turbines. So yeah, basically that's it.
Yeah, Arib, and I think just to add on to what you were saying, talking about Denmark, Yasin was also my good friend. He was our good friend. He also talked about Denmark a lot. So I think Arib, just to add on to what you were saying, in my opinion, that's it. Another important ethical aspect of Denmark's sustainability model is environmental stewardship, because I'd say there's a deep cultural respect for nature in Denmark, and this is reflected in the country's environmental policies, as they see it as a moral responsibility to care for the environment, ensuring that ecosystems remain intact and that natural resources are used responsibly. And Denmark's leadership in renewable energy, particularly wind power, is a direct result of this commitment to environmental stewardship. And by harnessing natural resources in a sustainable way, Denmark is reducing its impact on the environment while promoting economic growth as well. And this approach highlights how sustainability is not just about economic necessity, but just about it's also about protecting the planet as like and as a ethical duty as well. And Denmark's focus on sustainable urban planning is another example of this ethical commitment, because cities like Copenhagen are designed with sustainability in mind, with green spaces, bicycle-friendly infrastructure, and eco-friendly public transportation. And this careful planning is not just about reducing emissions; it's about creating healthy, livable environments that respect and preserve nature. And I'd say that one more ethical dimension we can overlook is transparency and accountability, as Denmark places a strong emphasis on ensuring that its sustainability policies are transparent and that businesses, government institutions, and individuals are held accountable for their environmental impact. And Denmark's commitment to transparency builds public trust and ensures that everyone plays their part in creating a sustainable society. And the Danish government regularly reports on its progress towards climate goals. And there are mechanisms in place to ensure that industries comply with environmental regulations. And in my opinion, like, this level of transparency is critical because it reinforces the ethical commitment to collective action in addressing climate change. And Danish companies are also held to high standards when it comes to sustainability, as many Danish businesses are required to report on their environmental and social impact. And this basically creates a culture of accountability that ensures that profit is not prioritized over the planet.
Yeah, adding on to what Shazib said, I think that transparency is very important, and the reason these Scandinavian countries are so transparent is because of their stability in their economy and in their political environment. They have a stable government which provides them with everything they need. They have their first, second, and third generation rights all given to them, and I think that plays a huge role because that makes their GN. That's what puts them. That's what the people, they give the people what they want, which makes them happy, and they're actually, like, all three of the countries are ranked top 10 in the GNH, gross national happiness, the index that was developed by Bhutan, that was founded by Bhutan. And I think, like, when the people are happy, when the nation is happy, they get what they want. That's when they're going to be transparent. They're going to listen. Also, another thing I wanted to add is, all these three countries, they have really low use of technologies that actually that require that negatively impact the environment. Like, we already talked about transport, but there's also air conditioning and heaters. They actually have really low use of air conditioning because even in the summer, their weather never gets too hot. It just gets warm. And for heater, they use technologies that they use heaters that use renewable energies and not non-renewable energies. So they are sustainable in that aspect as well. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for sharing your invaluable opinions. Again, our topic of discussion to this episode 24, Green Giants, how Scandinavian economies are leading the world in sustainable innovation. And as talking about Denmark is a leader in wind energy. For example, Denmark has been a pioneer in wind energy with 50% of the country's electricity coming from wind power in 2023. And there have been also a lot of offshore wind expansion, like projects like Kriegers Flak contributes 600 megawatts to the energy grid with plans for even larger islands in the North Sea. And Denmark is also building the world's first energy islands to generate 5 gigawatts of wind energy, which will be enough to power 5 million homes. And these islands will be enough to distribute access power to neighboring countries, strengthening European energy security. And Copenhagen also aims to be the world's first carbon neutral capital by 2025 through initiatives like green urban planning, bicycling infrastructure, and district heating system. And the city has also more bicycles than cars, with 60% of the population commuting to work or school by work or by bike. And Denmark is also at the forefront of sustainable agriculture, with organic farming accounting for 11% of total farmland, one of the highest percentages in Europe. And investments in lab-grown meat and plant-based alternatives, with companies like Novozymes leading in enzyme research for sustainable food production. As for the public transport electrification, all Scandinavian countries are investing in electrifying public transport. Norway's buses are increasingly becoming electric, with 60% of Oslo's public bus. Gothenburg are also adopting electrical trams and ferries to reduce carbon emissions. And Denmark's goal is for all public buses to be zero emission by 2030. And there's also a lot of green energy, hydrogen initiatives. For example, investments in green hydrogen for energy, heavy industry and transportation have been taking place by the green giants. And Norway and Sweden are also focusing on hydrogen fueling stations to support the to shift towards hydrogen powered trucks and buses. And there's also a lot of strong emphasis on sustainable architecture. For example, all three countries have adopted green building standards like BREEAM and LEED to minimize the environmental impact of construction. And Scandinavian companies are also leading the world in the construction of high-rise buildings made from sustainable timber, such as Sara Cultural Center in Sweden. And there's also a lot of carbon pricing implemented in these three countries, as you have said. For example, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark have implemented carbon pricing mechanisms to discourage emissions. Sweden also has one of the highest carbon tax rates globally at $137 per ton. And the high investments in R&D for green technologies have been also done by these nations, averaging on 3 to 4% of the GDP. And cities like Stockholm, Copenhagen, and also Oslo also serve as innovation hubs, home to many startups focusing on sustainability, clean tech, and circular economy solutions. So these are all the things that the green giants have done to lead the world in sustainable innovation. And my question to the group, Mr. Amer, Bhuiyan, Shazib Karim, and Ari Malik, is that is this green energy transition and innovation only being is this only helping the Scandinavian countries, or is it also helping is it also helping to have spillover effects on other nations as well, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, or in the Americas? Is it are the innovations being done by the Scandinavian countries helping other nations as well, or is it just helping them? That's my question to Mr. Amer, Bhuiyan, Shazib Karim, and Ari Malik.
I think it definitely is helping, because when one country does something, other countries only follow. I think, as I said earlier, it's actually turning into a pattern in Europe, starting with the Scandinavian countries. It's spreading so across Europe rapidly. People are following the initiatives, and actually the EU has taken initiatives to make countries go through similar procedures that that Sweden, Norway, and Denmark are going through, and other countries from other countries are also seeing this. And because everyone knows this is what they should do, but countries don't usually take environment really seriously, because they think it's gonna cost them. But then they see the great examples of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, how they are taking simple initiatives, and they're changing their entire the entire future. And yeah, so all these countries like retreating rapidly, and that's encouraging other countries to also do the same.
Yeah, Araf, to add my own opinion and answer your question, in my opinion, I'd strongly say yes, because they are influencing and impacting other countries as well. Because these Scandinavian countries are strong advocates in international climate diplomacy, because by pushing for higher climate standards and commitments in forums like the UN climate change conferences, they're influencing global climate policies. And their success in combining economic growth with sustainability serves as a model for other countries, showing that a green energy transition is feasible and beneficial as well. Also, Scandinavian countries are also exporting their sustainable urban planning models. As cities like Copenhagen are setting the global standard for sustainable urban living, inspiring other cities as well to adopt practices like bike friendly infrastructure, green public transportation, and energy efficient buildings.
Yeah, I would agree with Shazib and Amir, and and to answer our question, I would say the Scandinavian innovation has a great extent of impact on the world, but I would say particularly on the European continent, this has impacted the most because the patterns that we see in these Scandinavian countries are also being employed in other parts of the EU, such as the carbon emission stacks, and also a greater focus towards renewable energy. And not just the European continent, I would say North America as well. The influence of Scandinavian innovations, particularly regarding sustainability practices, has a moderate to a great extent of impact, because in North America, for example, we're seeing a greater adoption of the EV vehicles, which has inspired states like California to pursue similar strategies regarding EV adoption. And also Norway's incentives programs, including zero VAT on EVs, are cited as models for US states seeking to expand EV markets and reduce carbon emissions. But I would say, like, talking about like Latin America, for example, Latin America also has some impact. For example, in Brazil has the largest wind energy capacity in Latin America, and Danish companies like Vestas have actually installed significant portion of Brazil's turbines, and also wind energy turbines, and also sustainable city planning in Mexico has been done, which was inspired by Scandinavian expertise. But I would say Asia and Africa, these two continents, haven't really been impacted that most. Asia, I would say, has impacted some. For example, in China, there's some level of wind energy, and this contributes to China's renewable energy goals, as the country aims to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. And also in the there's offshore wind farms in Taiwan, which me, you, and I think Amer also actually saw on our trip to Taipei. Like, there's a lot of offshore wind farms in Taiwan, which are actually being developed by Danish companies like Ørsted. So I would say Asia has some impacts, but but Africa, I would say Africa has limited to moderate impact. Obviously, there's some countries like Kenya, which has seen Africa's largest wind power project in Kenya as well. But I would say East Africa has seen some level of influence, but I would say Sub-Saharan Africa or West Africa hasn't seen that much of an influence yet.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your invaluable opinions. Again, our topic of discussion is episode 24, Green Giants, how Scandinavian economies are leading the world in sustainable action. And I think the Scandinavian nations are also going to face some challenges and in the future. For example, they have to also balance economic growth with sustainability. For example, Norway faces the challenge of reducing reliance on oil while transitioning to renewable energy. Sweden must also integrate green innovations into existing industries while managing energy demands as it moves away from fossil fuels. And Denmark, which is a major agriculture exporter, needs to ensure that food production meets global demand sustainably. And there's also a lot of focus on energy storage solutions to handle the intermittency of renewables. For example, the smart grid development and integration of renewable energy sources requires the development of smart grids for energy efficiency. And Scandinavian countries are also partnering with EU neighbors on cross-border green initiatives. They also participate in global climate finance to support developing nations in their green transition. And there's also a lot of green electric vehicle adoption done by all of these countries. For example, Norway, 79% of the new car sales in 2023 were electric, while in Sweden, 54% of new car sales in 2023 were electric or hybrid. And as for Denmark, 49% of new car sales in 2023 were electric or hybrid. For example, there are also some potential for increasing in renewable energy contribution. Norway has around 95% of electricity from hydroelectric power, while Sweden 54% of electricity comes from renewable sources, aiming for 100% renewable energy by 2040. And for Denmark, 50% of electricity from wind power, with an aim for 100% by 2030. And Sweden also aims for net zero emissions by 2045, and Denmark aims for 70% emissions reduction by 2030, while Norway aims for carbon neutrality by 2050. So, what other challenges do you think these countries might face as they are leading the world in sustainable innovation and in producing green and renewable energy? This question applies to Shazib Karim, Mr. Amer Bhuiyan, or Arif Malik. Shazib, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure. So you asked a very interesting question on what challenges they might face. So I think, in my opinion, if we look at the Scandinavian countries, so if we look at Norway, for example, I'd say that Norway faces a unique challenge because of its heavy reliance on oil exports for economic growth. And while the country leads in renewable energy with its vast hydropower resources, its economy still depends on oil production and export revenues. And the challenge for Norway lies in balancing this paradox, like maintaining its role as a major oil exporter while striving to reduce global carbon emissions and meet domestic sustainability goals. And managing the transition to a fully green economy without undermining its economic stability will be complicated, I think, and challenging. And with Denmark and Sweden, I'd say with their large shares of renewable energy, they face the issue of grid stability because renewable energy sources like wind and solar are they're intermittent and they depend on weather conditions and the time of day, leading to potential fluctuations in energy supply. And managing these fluctuations requires advanced energy storage solutions such as batteries or pumped hydro storage, as well as investments in smart grid technology to ensure that energy supply remains stable even when renewable generation dips. And while Denmark is a world leader in wind energy, ensuring consistent power during periods of low wind presents a major technical and financial challenge. Sweden's reliance on hydropower helps, but as the country shifts away from nuclear power and increases wind and solar energy, it'll also need to address potential grid imbalances. And I'd also say that while the Scandinavian countries have reduced their domestic emissions, they still have a significant carbon footprints from imported goods. And many of the goods consumed in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway are produced in countries with higher carbon emissions, which shifts a portion of their environmental impact abroad. And addressing this global carbon footprint is challenging, as it involves influencing supply chains, international trade agreements, and global production standards. And I'd say to reduce their global impact, these countries will need to advocate for stronger international climate regulations and work toward decarbonizing trade and production chains globally. And so another factor that I'd say is, despite their leadership in reducing emissions, Scandinavian countries are not immune to the effects of climate change because, rising sea levels, changing weather patterns, and more extreme weather events can affect infrastructure, agriculture, and natural ecosystems. For example, Denmark, with its extensive coastline, faces risks of coastal erosion and flooding due to rising sea levels. And Norway's northern regions could see shifts in marine ecosystems and fisheries due to warming ocean temperatures. And in my opinion, I'd say adapting to these changes will require robust climate resilience, planning, and substantial investments. So I'd say these are some challenges that the Scandinavian countries might have to deal with.
Yeah, I agree with what Shazib said, especially the Norway. Norway's heavy reliance on its oil industry. I think it needs to diversify. I think Araf Malik mentioned it at the beginning of this conversation about um, Norway trying to diversify. I think they should, because other oil reliant countries like Saudi, for example, is also trying to diversify its economy through other means. But this becomes another challenge um, because because they can only diversify in so many ways. Like they also have to make sure they don't diversify in a way that will affect their environment negatively. So they have to maintain their sustainability even when diversifying. So that becomes even more challenging. And I wanted to talk specifically about Denmark. So Denmark has a lot of challenges, like some of which Jose Karim already mentioned. So, for example, the intermittency of renewable energy. So Denmark relies heavily on wind energy, with nearly 50% of its electricity coming from wind energy. So this creates challenges for energy stability because wind power is unpredictable. Like sometimes it can be high, sometimes it can be low. So it also needs to diversify its energy sources with other renewable energy. But it's heavily reliant on wind, and uh, there's also the economic costs and investments. So the transition to a sustainable economy for Denmark, including investments in renewable energy infrastructure, green buildings, and circular economy practices, involves significant upfront costs. And even though they do have a pretty good economic stability, this their goals for renewability and sustainability are very high and will require high upfront costs. And this could also place pressures on public finances, businesses, and households, especially during periods of like inflation or economic uncertainty, and with the added effect of all the carbon taxing that businesses already face, the high carbon taxes. And there's also social equity and inclusion. So affordability for low income households. So the transition to sustainability, they're not fully sustainable. So there's still households and companies are still transitioning to sustainable approaches to everything. So the transition to sustainability can disproportionately affect low income households, especially when it comes to adopting energy efficient technologies or retrofitting homes to meet new energy standards. So energy taxes or carbon pricing may increase cost of electricity, heating, or fuel, leading to social inequalities, etc. There's also the transportation sector, which is also important factor. So decarbonizing transport. So while Denmark has made significant progress in decarbonizing electricity production, the transportation sector remains a major challenge because electric vehicle adoption is increasing, but the widespread shift from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles requires extensive infrastructure investments such as charging stations, etc. So again, money. So money is their biggest challenge. Yeah, that's about what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I would also like to say that there's also been, like particularly in the Scandinavian countries in recent years, the political landscape has also seen notable shifts, particularly with the rise of right-wing populist parties. And this shifts has implications for the pursuit of green energy policies, as right-wing movements often challenge ambitious climate goals, particularly when they're perceived to conflict with national economic interests, traditional industries, or rural communities. For example, I would say Norway is a great example because Norway is still heavily reliant on oil, but they're still trying to be more sustainable economically. And I would say Norway's political environment is therefore very unique, and the rise of the right-wing parties in Norway has been very prominent with the rise of the Progress Party, which in the Norwegian language I believe is pronounced Fremskritt Spartiet, and it is largely and like I think the pronunciation might be a bit might not be enunciated correctly, but the Progress Party basically of Norway is largely tied to the defense of the oil and gas sector and is heavily resisting to policies that might undermine it, because the Progress Party has been a long defender of Norway's oil and gas industry and has advocated for continued exploration and drilling even in the sensitive Arctic region. And they argue that Norway should not rush its transition to green energy at the expense of its economic security and a high standard of living, which are largely sustained by oil revenues. And right-wing parties also oppose carbon taxes, and because carbon taxes are not really because carbon taxes actually make it more expensive to buy gasoline powered vehicles, and since Norway already produces so much oil, these parties feel like it would actually make more sense to just have these gasoline powered vehicles. And also I would say the rural communities in Norway, Sweden, and other Scandinavian countries, many of whom are employed in the oil-related industries, have been skeptical of the ambitious climate targets. So I would say, despite the fact that majority of the Scandinavian countries are trying to implementing fiscal and monetary policies to make sure their country is more economically sustainable. I would say there is a small percentage of people who are strictly against this, mostly because their jobs are linked to the non-renewable energy sector, and they fear that if their industry ceases to exist, what will they do? So obviously, I would say this has happened in the history as well. When even during the industrial revolution, like farmers, like they were scared regarding what would happen if everything becomes industrialized. But I would say, as a society, human beings tend to adopt to changes more quickly than we actually assume. So I would say these people have nothing to worry about in the, like, those who oppose the carbon taxes, because actually in the long run it will be better for them and for the whole world consequently.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your invaluable opinions. To bring our discussion to a conclusion, I believe that the Scandinavian countries are leading the world in sustainable innovation through their ambitious climate goals, commitment to renewable energy, and comprehensive policies fostering economic growth and green growth as well. And their success is built on a mix of political will, public-private partnerships, and a cultural emphasis on environmental responsibility and social well-being, which I believe can be modeled in other nations as well. Despite the challenges, their ongoing efforts in innovation, renewable energy expansion, and sustainable infrastructure position them as a role model for achieving a balanced and green economy in the 21st century. So that's my opinion. Is that an opinion and conclusion that every one of you would agree with? Shazib Karim, Arif Malik, and Mr. Amer Bhuiyan?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree.
Thank you, Mr. Shazib Karim, Arif Malik, and Mr. Amer Bhuiyan for your agreements. That brings our discussion to an end for today. Our discussion today was episode 24. Episode 24, Green Giants, how Scandinavian economies are leading the world in sustainable innovation, with Mr. Amer Bhuiyan. Mr. Amer Bhuiyan, thank you very much for joining into this discussion. Are there any final words that you like to say before we depart for today?
Firstly, I would like to thank for inviting me to this wonderful conversation. I love the dollar dialogue. We had some very insightful conversations, and finally, I would like to say that every country in the world should follow the initiatives taken by the Scandinavian countries towards sustainable development.
Thank you, Mr. Amer Bhuiyan, for your final words. Now, that brings our discussion to an end. Today's discussion was episode 24, Green Giants, how Scandinavian economies are leading the world in sustainable innovation, with Mr. Amer Bhuiyan. Thank you to the audience for listening and tuning in into today's discussion and listening our opinions and the information that we provided on the topic. And we hope to see you next week with another very interesting topic, with another very interesting guest speaker. Thank you and goodbye for now. Goodbye for now.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no